In this video, I'm going to show you how to write an absolute value equation if you are given your two answers. Now, right here I have the basic format. This right here is what the absolute value equation will end up looking like. And I've got a number line here to help us visualize what each thing means. Now, A and C, the endpoints, are the answers to your equation. That's what you're going to start with. This is what you know at the beginning. B is your midpoint. It's halfway between A and C, and that's what gets put inside the absolute value. So, and it is x minus whatever that value is. D is the distance between your midpoint and one of your endpoints. So you can go from middle to the right one or middle to the left one. It doesn't matter because it is equal. So in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's how many spaces apart it is. It's still 1, 2, 3, 4 on the other side. So that's what goes over here. Now there's more than one way you can do this. There's a more formula type way of doing it. I'll show you first. B, your midpoint, can be found by averaging your answers. So add them and divide by 2. That's how you can get your B value. D, the distance between your midpoint and the endpoint, is almost the same. The difference is you're subtracting. And it does need to be positive because it's a distance. Distances are always positive. Whatever numbers you get here, they're going to go into the equation. So, like down here, I tell you that the answers are 4 and 5. So, to find the B value, I do 4 plus 5 over 2 to get 4.5. To find D, I do 5 minus 4 over 2 and get 0.5. That's where these numbers came from. You can also use a number line to do it. 4 and 5, midway between 4 and 5 is 4.5. The difference between 4.5 and 5 is 0.5. That's another way you can get these. So let's look at a problem and work it from scratch. And I'm going to rewrite the format here. X minus B equals D. There we go. So I'm going to start with the more formula type method. Okay, 6 and 10. To find my B value, I'm going to do 6 plus 10 over 2. So that's 16 over 2, which is 8. To find D, I subtract 10 minus 2. Or I'm sorry, 10 minus 6 over 2. So that's 4 halves, which is 2. Therefore, my equation is x minus 8 equals 2. Now, I can also work this with a number line. So let me show you what I mean. So I have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So halfway between each one is 8. That's where that came from. The distance between 8 and 10 is 2. That's where that came from. I like using the number line. Personally, I think it's easier and quicker. It is entirely a personal preference. And number line is good if you're dealing with numbers that are fairly close together, but if you're dealing with numbers really far apart, so maybe like 2 and 100, you're not going to want to do a number line for that. You want to do it this way. But when they're fairly close together, I like a number line. So here I have -4, -3, 2, 1, 0, 1, 2. Okay, there's my number line. I need to go midway between them. So I just kind of go from either side, and -1 is where they meet. So -1 is my midpoint. When I go to write out my equation, keep in mind what you're going to have is x minus -1. You're subtracting a negative. If you're subtracting a negative, you're really adding. Double negative changes to addition. So now we figure out the other side. To go from -1 to either endpoint is 1, 2, 3 spaces. So 3 goes over here. Now both of these problems we just worked, the two answers were both even. So we got whole numbers. It was very easy to look at. But sometimes if you have one even and one odd, you're going to get some fractions or decimals thrown in there. So like on here. I'm going to work this one out the number line way. The next one I'm going to work out the other way. Okay. So there's -20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15. There's -15 there. 16, -17, -18, -19. Okay. So we need to fill in our B and D value. For our B value, if I start trying to find what the midpoint is, what I'll find is it meets in between -17 and -18. So it meets at -17.5. And remember, when you're subtracting a negative, like up here, subtracting a negative means you're changing it to addition. Now for the B value. To go from here to either endpoint, we move 1, 2, and a half spaces. So that's 2.5. When it looks something like that, or when you're dealing with numbers really, really far apart, you might be better off doing it the other way. So absolute value of x minus whatever b is equals whatever d is. So let's fill in the space. To find b, remember this is where you add and divide by 2. So 12 plus 17 over 2. So that's 29 halves, which is 14.5. And so x minus positive 14.5. Now we go and we do the same thing, but subtract to find d. So 17 minus 12 over 2, that's 5 halves, which is 2.5. So you could have done a number line on this one, same as what I did over here, but you can see either way, both processes work to give you the answer. Alright, now absolute values are really useful in scenarios, real life scenarios where your answer must come out to be a positive. So maybe you're looking at maybe you end up having to come up with calculations for measurements, like maybe the length of a steel beam or something. Distances, lengths, those have to be positive. Or you might be dealing with a situation where you need how many of something. Well, if you're counting something, you're going to be counting them as positive numbers. So absolute values are useful in real life when you have to have a positive answer. This is kind of a format for a real life problem where you have to have an absolute value equation. And they're really useful when you are looking at deviations. So when I say deviations, absolute value deviations, how far above or below a given value. So let's say when you're trying to get something a certain distance away, like maybe 50 feet, but if you go 5 feet above or below, it's still fine. That 5 feet above or below, that's your deviation. The 50 feet is your given value. If you compare it to what we were just doing, absolute deviation is your D value, your given value is B. So let's look at this problem here. Listed are computer prices. You're willing to pay the mean price with a deviation of at most $100. Okay. How many of the computers meet your conditions? Write an absolute value equation for this scenario. So the first thing we would have to do is find what the mean price is. Now remember, mean means average. So we're going to find the average. To find the average, you add all the computer prices together, which ends up being 5,040, and then you divide by how many there are, in this case 8. And when you divide that, you get an average value of $630. Now, the problem asks how many of the computers meet your conditions. Well, we can look at just this and know that the deviation is 100 and tell what it is. So what you're saying is 630, give or take $100, meaning anything between $530 and $730 works. So we don't necessarily need an absolute value equation for this part. But what if you're working for a company and they're needing to upgrade technology, they're looking to get some new computers, and they're wanting you to look at hundreds of different options? You might not want to go through each and every one. So you might use a computer program, maybe Excel or Google Spreadsheets or something like that, and use that to do it. Well, the thing is, there was a computer programmer who designed the program and the algorithms that'll make it work, which includes this absolute value equation. So an example, well, I say an example, what the absolute value equation we're writing for this scenario would be the absolute value of x minus our given value. Well, our given value is that 630. That's the midpoint. Remember, B is your midpoint. That's what that is. Equals your deviation. Well, deviation is 100. You can go up 100, down 100, anywhere between there. So you can use a spreadsheet or Excel or something like that. You can list all the computer prices in there, and somebody who designed the program, they programmed it to be able to average all those values easily, like we did here, and they programmed it to be able to do something like this. So a lot of the programs we use to make life easier use algebra equations in their algorithms to make it work. So a lot of real life scenarios can be related to that. Alright, so that's it for writing absolute value equations.